Shalom Kulam, I'm John Little and this is the ShockCast for Saturday, July 14th, 2018. The assault on Paul. There has been a real hatred for Paul the Apostle from the very beginning of his ministry until now, and it's a satanic hatred that seeks to undermine the Bible and the body of Christ. Worst of all, recent versions of this satanic hatred are coming from those who call themselves Christian. I'm used to hearing non-Christians attack Paul. I've seen this stuff for decades. But Christians? Really? Yes, really, and I'm afraid that this development is going to increase as corruption within our churches also increases. Jesus spoke of these things happening in the last days, but it still boggles the mind to see it. When Joel left this comment in the comment section of last week's article, quote, "There is a growing number of Christians who say Paul was a false prophet. I have never heard of this until recently," close quote. I confess to having been unprepared to respond properly. I was used to hearing every kind of non-Christian attack on Paul. I would often hear this common refrain: "We don't have a problem with Jesus, we just don't like Paul." Of course, since they weren't Christians, I expected that kind of thing. After all, they didn't understand Jesus, so there was no way that they were going to understand Paul. So I originally thought that the charismatics were leading this assault on Paul's words. Many charismatics have been rebelling against Paul for a long time, putting female pastors in the pulpit and violating Paul's admonition about the proper place for speaking in tongues. But my original thoughts were wrong. Yes, those rebellious charismatics are still in rebellion, and among other Christians, but the biggest rebels are the ones who want to bring back the Mosaic Law, the Hebrew roots movement. And when you do the following searches, in this case it was Paul and then quote, false apostle, unquote. The next one is, and I provide these links in the article and of course in the comment section below. And then I have Paul, quote, false prophet, unquote. And the next one is Paul, quote, false teacher, unquote. I guarantee when you run those searches that you will be shocked at what you find. I certainly was. How is it possible for people to do this? Remember that Peter completely agreed with Paul and accepted him as an apostle. If you disavow Paul, you must also disavow Peter. Here's the verse in question, quote, and this is from 2 Peter 3, verse 15. "And account that the long suffering of our Lord is salvation, even as our beloved brother Paul also, according to the wisdom given unto him, hath written unto you." Close quote. Again, 2 Peter 3:15. That right there is an explicit acceptance of Paul, and Peter had every reason to be upset with Paul after Peter was publicly criticized by Paul in one of his letters. Now, I wrote this last week, quote, "Jesus knew that this was going to happen, so there's no way around what we are experiencing now. In fact, it will get worse, much worse. So my prescription to you is to get rid of your commentaries and read your Bible. Read all of it, from Genesis to Revelation, and do it in a year, every year. I have been reading my Bible through every year for decades, and it has been an immense blessing. In fact, it rescued me from a lot of error, and I want you to be rescued from any errors that you might have. In the dark days ahead, you will need to be guided by the Holy Spirit if we are to have any hope of survival. But how are you going to be guided by the Holy Spirit if you aren't reading the precious words of God that have been inspired by the Holy Spirit? Please, commit to reading your Bible, commit to reading all of it. And that's from False Prophets Shall Arise, the article from last week. And I'm afraid that this admonition is even more important in this foul and evil assault upon the Bible. People will come and attempt to ensnare you in their lies and delusions. You need to have the words of God safely preserved in your heart and mind so that you can answer them from the Bible. To do that, you must be reading your Bible, all of it, even the boring parts. So, that's that is the rather short article for this week. Let's get into the next important part of this ShockCast, the news and analysis from this past week. But before going on, take a moment to click the subscribe button below. And I'm going to get better at pointing my finger like this. And hit that bell to be notified when the next ShockCast happens. Those of you listening via MP3, make sure that you are subscribed to the Shock Letter at theshockletter.com. And again, I apologize for those of you that have been having trouble getting the ShockCast, or the Shock Letter, sorry. Unfortunately, there are organizations that block Omega Shock and the Shock Letter. But hopefully that with this combined operation of the ShockCast and the Shock Letter and OmegaShock.com and a host of other things out there, that you'll be getting the weekly message. And then there's this important part, and there's an important reason to be subscribed to the Shock Letter, since I usually do not have the time to talk about more than just a fraction of the news that I analyze here on the ShockCast. So subscribe to the Shock Letter and get all the news and links that I analyze for free. In fact, everyone should sign up for the Shock Letter. Subscribing and unsubscribing is easy, and there's no way that I would ever share the subscription list with anyone. I'm not in this for the money, and never will be. Now, the big subjects that I saw this week were more and more evidence of peak oil, and it's horrifying. The drug war that isn't a war on drugs, more on both China and Russia, and then a growing insanity, in addition to a few other items of interest. So let's get into all of that. This first one is crude oil prices. There are fears about an oil spike above $150 from Bloomberg Quint. I love how Bloomberg is spinning this catastrophe. They are claiming that oil companies have reduced their investment in searching for new oil and gas reserves, and they're claiming that investors clamoring for dividends are the cause of this. Sorry, but that's a lie, or at least a partial lie. When you look at this graph, and it's a graph from SRSRoccoReport.com from June, Total World Oil Capital Investment Upstream, you'll see that it is true that investment in oil exploration has declined since a huge spike in 2014. But oil exploration is still above 2007 and just below 2008 levels. The writer of this article claims that the investment in oil exploration is the lowest in a generation. Of course, he said reinvestment ratio, but that's the same thing. What is his definition of a generation? Is he such an idiot that 10 years is a generation? But he makes a claim here that should scare anyone with an IQ above room temperature. Quote, proven reserves of the world's top companies have fallen by more than 30% on average since 2000, with only Exxon and BP showing an improvement, helped by acquisitions. They bought oil companies instead of actually finding more oil reserves. But back to the quote. Bernstein said, meanwhile, more than 1 billion people will urbanize in Asia over the next 2 decades, and this will drive demand for cars, as well as air travel, road freight, and plastics that also require oil, also according to Bernstein. Close quote. In fact, let me point out the statement that should send chills down your spine. Proven reserves have fallen by 30%. And that figure is only for those companies that must provide these figures. I'm betting that Saudi Aramco has lost a lot more than that. They don't have to provide those figures. So yes, the title is correct. Oil will spike above $150 a barrel, and it will kill every developed economy in the world that is not solely based on oil production for its source of GDP. We were warned that this was coming, but we chose to ignore the truth. And it wasn't a truth that was hard to see or understand, so we have no one but ourselves to blame. And yes, I cannot emphasize enough the catastrophe that's rolling down upon us. A 30% decline in proven oil reserves. Please understand the seriousness of this piece of information. Catastrophe is coming. But moving on. Why Silicon Valley doesn't mind rising gas prices. Now here's an interesting delusion. It's summer and it's hot outside. I'm here in Taipei and we get just a little toasty, at least for most of you. Those of you in the southern hemisphere have a different problem. It's winter down there. So have you noticed how much strain there is on the electric grid right now? Right. Now dump a whole bunch of electric cars on that grid. The need to charge them up quickly and get them out on the road. Our current electrical infrastructure can barely handle current electricity demands, and now they want to add electric vehicles? Are they insane? No, just very, very stupid. Well, maybe also insane. This next one is OPEC's oil output jumps in June as Saudi Arabia opens the taps. Jumps? You mean 500,000 barrels per day is a jump? No, that's not a jump. That's a wheeze. That's a groan. That's an attempt at increasing oil production and doing little more than whimper about it. They're saying that demand for oil will go past 100 million barrels per day. Where is that oil going to come from? Fracking? Most fracking companies weren't profitable at $120 a barrel. And we saw what happened to our economies when oil was at $120 a barrel. And with proven oil reserves continuing to collapse, I have to wonder at the reason why people aren't talking about this problem. And why is this so hard for people to figure out? It's amazing to me. Then this next one, why the coming oil crunch will shock the world, peak prosperity. I truly wish that I could minimize the seriousness of this problem. I wish that ignoring it could make it go away. I wish that a smug assurance that we can use human ingenuity to find a way around this problem will provide us with a way around this problem. But human history shows us that we've had problems like this before, and we've always failed to address them in a way that avoids disaster. Like it or not, disaster is coming. I believe that this disaster will begin when the fracking companies can no longer afford to make their debt payments, and that will happen when interest rates go higher. It will also happen when investors lose their appetite for junk-rated bonds. And all the companies directly involved in fracking oil, well, they all have junk-rated bonds. All of them. We are all just one bond market crash away from seeing the reality of peak oil, and once that reality becomes apparent, the consequences will be truly catastrophic. And here's some key quotes from this article. Quote, or first quote. Further, to claim that the U.S. will never again depend on foreign oil is beyond bizarre. As I've been explaining for years, shale fields deplete and decline ferociously. Even the hyper-bullish EIA thinks that the shale fields will peak out in 2025. I think earlier, and I do as well. And then go into permanent decline. That's the first section of quote. In this next one, under getting our priorities straight, quote, what if we started by embracing these three facts? Fact 1. Fossil fuels have provided a supernova of surplus energy, one that has enabled literally everything and everyone you see around you to spring into existence. Fact 2. Fossil fuels are a very recent discovery for humans, barely 150 years old. Half of our consumption of them has happened in just the last 25 years alone, due to exponentially increasing use. Fact 3. Fossil fuels will not last forever. They are finite and will someday peak and then decline, representing a once-in-a-species bonanza never to be repeated. And that's that section of quotes. And then this next one. Quote, for example, if we decide we want electric transportation powered by wind and solar to be anything more than a meaningless tiny percentage of the total BTU, or British thermal units, mix, then we're going to have to use a lot of fossil fuels to make that happen. It takes an enormous amount of fossil fuels to manufacture, install, maintain, and replace every single alt energy component. The question then becomes, where do we want to be when that future arrives? If we want to have livable cities and towns with nearby green belts and an alt energy infrastructure delivering clean energy sustainably forever into the future, then an enormous amount of planning and building is going to be required to get anywhere near close to that. He's right. This alt energy requires an enormous amount of fossil fuels to be expended just to get that stuff produced, created, and in place. And then the next quote. With an appropriate energy strategy that matches reality, we can engineer a reasonably bright future. Without one, we just pursue business as usual until it literally destroys us as well as the ecosystems we depend on. Close quote. And then the next quote. This was a big article and it was really good. Quote, our analysis concludes that the hard stop for this credit bubble is resource-based, meaning the bubble in debt, both bonds and short-term debt and all the debt that he's talking about. And I predict it will be a sudden spike in the price of oil that will be the pin that this central bank-enabled bubbles absolutely cannot grow beyond. They will encounter this pin and burst. Remember, every bubble is every gigantic burst of stock market and bond market value is just a bubble looking for a pin. There will be plenty of time for tears and regrets then, but right now, you need to get ready. In part 2, he goes on, how the coming oil shock will impact absolutely everything. We go deep into the data showing why a global oil supply shortfall is unavoidable by or before 2020. That's less than 2 years away. Actually, guys, that's a year and a half away. If gas prices at today's $70 a barrel price bother you, you ain't seen nothing yet. The spike in oil's price that will result from the coming crunch will shock the world. As I've been saying, going on, as an increase in the price of oil feeds into the cost of everything, it acts like an interest rate increase in terms of depressing economic growth. If we haven't already entered one yet, this coming shock will absolutely throw the global economy into a recession. And if we're already in one when it hits, heaven help us. Close quote. That's a lot of quoting, but there's even more in the article. The bottom line is that we could have avoided this mess if we had chosen to be smart and intelligent. Worse, we knew that this was coming. We were warned in the 1950s and 1960s, and we had direct evidence in our faces in the 1970s, but we steadfastly refused to acknowledge the obvious. So now we pay. That payment is coming soon, maybe in just a year or two. Maybe even less, and the price will be in death and destruction. And I doubt that anyone is ready for this. It's going to be so bad, guys, really. But then it's Bernstein, oil may jump past $150 on chronic underinvestment from Zero Hedge. If you want to see death and destruction, watch oil hit $150 a barrel. That will collapse everything. All the fakery that has been papering over the world's financial problems will be washed away, and we'll all see the ugly truth. What will come afterwards will shock all of us. And part of that ugly truth will be the realization that the Gulf Arabs don't have as much oil as they claim to have. They're always good at lying, aren't they? That will touch off a hunt for oil that will lead to armed conflict on a global scale. You've noticed that China doesn't have any oil, right? Did you notice how much effort China invested in the previous president of Malaysia? Well, Malaysia controls the Malacca Strait, where almost all of China's oil comes from, and China's quote-unquote investment in Malaysia is now in jail on corruption charges. Will the Malacca Strait become a battleground for the coming war over oil? I suspect so. So I hope you're ready for this. Then moving on, slightly, it also includes oil in this one, but it's a little bit broader. It's called When Collapse Goes Kinetic, Zero Hedge. If you want to know what I'm talking about in the above article, James Howard Kunstler describes it quite well in his own article. And here are some quotes worth paying attention to. Quote, "The collapse of our techno-industrial setup has actually been going on for some time, insidiously and corrosively, without shattering the scaffolds of seeming normality, just stealthily undermining them. I date the onset of it to about 2005, when the world unknowingly crossed an invisible border into the terra incognito of peak oil, by which of course I mean oil that societies could no longer afford to pull out of the ground. It's one thing to have an abundance of really cheap energy, like oil was in 1955, but when the supply starts to get sketchy, and what's left can only be obtained at an economic loss, the system goes quietly insane." And that's the first block of quotes. The second one is this: "I expect the collapse to pick up more momentum as we turn the corner around summer." Quote, close quote, and he means this summer. The next quote is, "We commonly refer to this dynamic as growth. When that growth, as expressed in modern GDP terms, slowed dramatically after 2005, we launched an array of clever mechanisms to keep faking it for a while. Racking up immense debt was our way of faking it. If you can't cover your costs in the present, just borrow from the future. Unfortunately, that works only as long as there's some reasonable expectation that debt can be paid back. We're so far beyond that now, it's not funny. And that realization alone will destroy the bond markets and anything related to and dependent on its operations to function." Close quote. I wish that I could say that he's wrong. I really do, but I can't. He's right. Unfortunately, he's also foul-mouthed right, which is less appealing. That's why I can't link directly to his main website, because it's called Cluster FUCK Nation. And he doesn't spell out F-U-C-K. Well, he does, but anyway, you know what I'm talking about. However, when a truth teller uses foul language, he's still telling the truth. It's a painful truth. It's an ugly truth. It's a distinctly human and insane truth, but it's still the truth. Please pay attention to the truth. Now, here's another one, and this one is not about peak oil, but it's still horribly upsetting to me. It's an article that isn't quite honest, but it tells a painful story. It's called "The Secret Story of How America Lost the Drug War with the Taliban," from Politico. I would love to spend the time unraveling the gigantic lie that is buried deep within this article. Doing that would undoubtedly lead us to the deep state, and especially the CIA operations teams that are working with the Taliban to bring heroin into the U.S. Please understand that America still controls Afghanistan's airspace, and it is pathetically easy to see where the opium poppies are being grown and harvested. You can see the poppies from the air, especially when the flowers bloom. And it would be pathetically easy to spray those poppies and stop the heroin trade that has been destroying the lives of millions and millions of people. And yes, it really would be that easy to destroy the heroin trade. And it should be clear to all of us that the heroin trade exists because the United States wants it to exist. This, the heroin trade, is an American product. Those of you who are American will not want to believe me, and I understand that. You don't want to believe that America is the biggest narco state in the world, but with 90% of the world's heroin coming from Afghanistan, and therefore America. No one can deny this. Do I need to know how America is getting heroin out of Afghanistan? No, I don't need to. All that I need to know is that the U.S. Air Force can stop the heroin trade tomorrow, if it wants to. Because it does not, it is proof that America is involved in this drug trade. Yes, the U.S. Air Force and the CIA will undoubtedly let DAA agents into Afghanistan to poke around. and they will let drug agents burn a few stockpiles of heroin and opium. But if they want to live long, those agents won't poke too hard. After all, Afghanistan is a dangerous place. It wouldn't be hard for an agent to have an accident if he was too energetic and found out too much. Now, this wouldn't be so upsetting if lives weren't being destroyed by heroin. But they are being destroyed by the millions, and the deep state within the U.S. government is making billions of dollars in this drug trade. Billions. Who knows? Maybe even trillions. And it also dovetails with an important passage in Revelation. Quote, "And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived." Close quote, Revelation 18:23. The sorceries in this passage is this word. It is called it's actually is pharmakeia. My Greek is not as good as my Hebrew. And you will recognize that word since it means drugs, but not the good kind. An antibiotic that saves your life is not pharmakeia. My life was saved by antibiotics when I was a teenager, so I know that quite well. So if America is the greatest producer of pharmakeia, does that mean that she's the Babylon the Great that is mentioned in Revelation 18? Not necessarily. If another nation arises and takes America's place as the greatest producer and trafficker of heroin, then that nation will be the Babylon the Great. Remember, Britain also engaged in the opium trade at a vast level in the 1800s. But until then, we must assume that America is that city. Maybe I should say that Washington, D.C. is that city. Or is it New York? I don't know. I'm staying as far away from all that as possible. The moral collapse of my birthplace is too much to bear, let alone the thoughts that she is Babylon the Great. This next one hits a little bit closer to home. It's titled China's Invasion Plan for Taiwan. YouTube. If you want to know about the flashpoint that I'm sitting on top of, listen to that YouTube. You'll get an earful of the reasons why China wants to invade Taiwan, as well as the reasons why China might not want to invade Taiwan, or at least hesitate before doing so. Unfortunately, China is winning the propaganda war for the hearts and minds of the Taiwanese, and this video only hints at that effort. Only time will tell if the morons in charge of Taiwan's government will stop being so stupid and start acting more responsibly. Seriously, Taiwan, get your act together. And yes, my very Taiwanese Mrs. Little thinks that I'm being far too diplomatic in my choice of words. You can take that to the bank. This next one also is about China, and it's China in the crosshairs of American empire. It's also a YouTube. This puts the above two videos, or the above video about Taiwan, into perspective. If China falls apart, they won't be able to do anything about Taiwan, and the threat of falling apart really is the point here. Oh, and Black Pigeon Speaks, who does the video, really does understand China. Mrs. Little, who also really understands China, says so. And from my own understanding of Chinese history, I can verify. But there's an even deeper problem that Black Pigeon Speaks didn't address. Debt. China is groaning under a truly massive amount of debt that may even be approaching 300% of GDP. This is a catastrophe waiting to happen, and Trump is giving China a choice. Either play by the rules or lose your country. I have mixed emotions about all this. I don't want the Chinese to suffer, but their government has been threatening a tiny country that doesn't deserve to be threatened. Taiwan, where I live. Beijing has also been engaged in some very, very serious evil, and that needs to stop. Either way, suffering is coming to the Chinese people. I truly wish that this could have been avoided, but I don't see how. This next one is a little farther away, but a precursor of things that might be coming. And this one is Russia pursues Jehovah's Witnesses as extremists. To those of you who think of Russia as one of the good guys, think again. And this attempt to eliminate the JWs from Russia is another example of why Russia is not on the side of the angels. Here's the key part of this article. Quote, various groups have been targeted under a 2016 anti-extremism law. An additional 2017 Supreme Court ruling targeted the Jehovah's Witnesses specifically, ordering their dissolution in Russia. And this is quoting from someone. Officially, it's a totalitarian sect of extremists. But in fact, these are people who, because of their faith, are not susceptible to propaganda, said a man identified as a Russian FSB Secret Service officer by Radio Liberty. The system sees them as a threat because they are organized and independent. One day they may seek power, he told the station in an interview this year. Close quote. That's the kind of mindset that we expect from China. And we know the evil of China. This is an example of what we can expect from the Antichrist and from a country that will lead the Gog and Magog invasion of Israel. Do not be fooled by Russia. This other one is an interesting one. It's from Nassim Taleb, I believe, and it's Headless Robespierre's cautionary tale for the alt-left unleashed on America, the Daily Sheeple. This is what the left wants, a French Revolution. They want blood running in the streets. They want death and destruction. They want to feed their petty resentment and thirst for violence. The left is humanity at its worst. It's thuggery it's thuggery at its absolute worst, and it will be given room to grow and flourish when bad times come. We are all capable of demonstrating humanity at its worst. And I'm afraid that we're going to be given a demonstration of that more so than what we have seen now. But I'm not sure this was a Nassim Taleb article. Excuse me. Anyway, moving on. The most intolerant wins. Dictatorship of the small minority. And this one is from Nassim Taleb. And it's an interesting analysis of how a stubborn minority can change everything. This is a long one, the article. But if you read it, it's worth it. Think about how we, as Christians, act to moderate the worst evils of a society. Our stubbornness has a neutralizing effect on society as a whole. Unfortunately, we've stopped being stubborn. We have caved in to the urge to be more flexible. And that is part of the story of how Christianity lost its place in society. We must go back to being stubborn about the truth. We must. But we won't. Here's one, and this one, it's short, but it bugs me to death. In unprecedented move, Rosenstein asks hundreds of prosecutors to review the Supreme Court of the United States picks record zero hedge. And this was about the Supreme Court justice that Trump has nominated for the Supreme Court, the recent one. This is horrifying. If you weren't sure that Rosenstein was a diabolical fiend from hell, well, now you know. And all I can say is, wow, Rosenstein is horrendous. Now, this other one, and this is something that's interesting. White South African farmers seek refuge in Russia. It's a matter of life and death. I have been deeply concerned about the fate of the white South African farmers, so I treat this as good news. Hopefully, more and more of these farmers will do this, going to Russia to farm, both in Russia and elsewhere. One day, farmers will be valuable. And my hope is that all the South African farmers that escape will first of all escape South Africa and will be that valuable resource that we will need one day. Okay. Here's another one. Germany. So bad. Germany decapitating freedom of the press? Question mark. Well, I don't think there's a question mark needed here. And all I can say is, there goes Germany. And here's a summary, quoting, "If it was indeed the authorities' plan to censor the news and keep the information of the beheading under wraps, then it backfired. Due to the reports about the raid, because basically someone videotaped the victims of this attack, and a child was essentially beheaded. It was horrifying. They raided this guy's house because he took a picture, because he took a short video, because he was shocked at what he saw. They raided his house. Thousands of people have seen the video, and hundreds of thousands have heard about the botched censorship attempt. Hamburg's government is still trying to conceal the beheading. Among other things, they, the AfD party, wanted to know whether the child had been beheaded." This was another party. "The administration, in breach of its constitutional duty, refused to answer. It also censored the questions by blacking out whole sentences." I mean, they're suppressing what the violence that the immigrants are perpetrating in Germany. Why the beheading going on, why the beheading should be kept secret is anyone's guess. What has become clear is how easily authorities in Germany can censor the news and punish bloggers who spread undesired information, which means you and me. They have a vast toolbox of laws at their disposal. It doesn't seem to bother them that the law invoked in this case stipulates explicitly that it shall not be applied to the reporting of contemporary events. Close quote. Germany has destroyed their own country, and now they want to destroy what is left. These guys are amazing. Now, this one is, U.S. allies fear Trump will reduce U.S. troops in Europe, from McClatchy Washington Bureau. And this is about NATO. Here's a telling quote. "They are scared to death," former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta told McClatchy. "They are worried about a very unpredictable president of the United States. They are increasingly worried he is going to do things not based on what's in the best interests, but based solely on his vision of American first. Sorry, Europe, but you didn't pay your fair share of NATO. And Europe is scared to death? Seriously? It's quite possibly true, so I'm not saying that it isn't. I just find it interesting that Europe hasn't thought through her relationship with the United States more thoroughly. Europe has treated the U.S. with disdain, and now it's worried that America will bring her armed forces home. Europe is a truly bizarre place. I would not want to live there if I were any of you that are living in Europe. Okay, this next one, it's "The facts are true, the news is fake," from Incerto on Medium. This is a rather long article about fake news from Nassim Taleb. And it's a good article, but I find that the most fascinating part of it is this sentence. Quote, "The divergence is evidence in that journalists worry considerably more about the opinion of other journalists than that of the general public." Close quote. That is completely and utterly true, and this group narcissism is at the heart of the corruption of the news media. But the above sentence is just the beginning of a thoughtful paragraph. Quote, "Compared to a healthy system, say that of restaurants, as we saw in the Lindy chapter, restaurant owners worry about the opinion of their customers, not those of other restaurant owners, which keeps them in check and prevent the businesses from straying collectively away from its interests. Further, skin in the game creates diversity, not monoculture. Economic insecurity worsens the condition. Journalists are currently in the most insecure profession you can find. The majority lives hand-to-mouth, and ostracism by their friends could be terminal. Thus, they become easily prone to manipulation by lobbyists, as we saw with GMOs, the Syrian wars, etc. You say something unpopular in the profession of journalism about Brexit, GMOs, Putin, and you become history. This is the opposite of business, where Me Tooism is penalized." Close quote. The question is, how do we get rid of these dirtbags? I've seen too much corruption myself in the news, personally, and I want it to end. Journalists, we need to find a way for journalists to stop being concerned about what other journalists think of them. They need to start being concerned about what the truth is, which is what we want, right? Then, a piece of good news. Trump pardons Oregon ranchers whose imprisonment sparked deadly 41-day standoff from Zero Hedge. Well done, Mr. President. A horrifying wrong has been undone in a little way. Justice will not be served on the despicable agents and foul fiends from hell who murdered Lavoy Finicum, nor will this address all the damage that was done. But at least he did this. Again, well done, Mr. Trump. Very, very well done. Now we move on to a category that I find to be very, very important that very few people are paying attention to. I call it Isaiah 19. This category has expanded significantly. It's as if the floodgates on this issue have opened. It's an indication of the seriousness of the situation, and it's very serious indeed. Ethiopia is an extremely corrupt has an extremely corrupt government and has made worthless promises that they will carefully fill the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. I believe that they will fill that dam as fast as possible, drying up the Nile, just as chapter 19 of Isaiah said that they would. It is said that they will begin filling that dam next year. This is going to be traumatic for Egypt, just as Isaiah said. Now, this article is a chilling reminder of part of what Isaiah 19 said. It's titled, Lebanese Tourist Sentenced to 8 Years in Prison for ... Isaiah 19:4 says this, And the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord of hosts. Close quote. Well, we have this quote from the article that should concern everyone. Egyptian rights activists say they face the worst crackdown in their history under Sisi, accusing him of erasing freedoms won in the 2011 Arab Spring uprising that ended Hosni Mubarak's 30-year rule. Close quote. I recommend that no one travel to Egypt. I certainly will not, Lord willing. Then we move on to something that may or may not be good news. Tommy Robinson and his arrest and eventual murder if he's not freed from jail soon. What the UK did to Tommy Robinson is sick and twisted. He did not break the law in any way, and his summary imprisonment, meaning his imprisonment without warning or any way to defend himself in it, is a vile and evil act of a psychopathic judge and a psychopathic government. Worse, Tommy will probably be murdered in jail, and that murder will be on the hands of the British government. More importantly, it's a symbol and a symptom of what is happening, first in the UK and then elsewhere. Welcome to the pathological, psychopathic, diabolical Islamization of your country, wherever you are. So this Tommy Robinson appeal, there's a Tommy Robinson appeal update, and it's actually it's on YouTube, and there's even an associated link, TommyTrial.com. I'm not sure if this is good news or bad, but it appears that Tommy Robinson's appeal will be heard by the highest level judges in Britain on July 18th, and that's just 4 days from now. Hopefully the judges will see sense and free Tommy. For the sake of the citizens of the UK, I hope that they will do this and push back at the insanity that has taken over the government of the UK. I'm not hopeful, but Ezra Levant is. Now we get to the moron section, and I am sorry, but I can't stand it anymore. There are just too many morons, so it needs its own category. And I do this to maintain my own sanity, in addition to maybe yours. I don't know. They're just driving me that crazy. This article is Papa John's founder, John Schnatter, resigns as chairman of company board. Why did he resign from the company that he founded? Because the N-word was said. How was it said? In a completely non-racist way. All that he was doing was describing someone else saying it. I'm getting really tired of morons being morons. Yes, calling people the N-word isn't nice. And in fact, if I say it, YouTube will probably ban this video. But there are a lot of horrifying terms out there that are used way too often, and I would love everyone to stop using such terms. But to force someone to resign because they described someone else using the N-word, I'm sorry, but that's insane. And if you are insane enough to get upset over me describing someone else's use of the word, the N-word, I use the N-word in my article, by the way, well, go away. I mean, I don't want insane people reading what I write. Oh, and to my black friends, and I have wonderful black friends. They're awesome. They're people like anybody else. Who knew? Anyway, when you stop using the N-word amongst yourselves, I'm sure that white people will use that word less. Just a thought. And my black friends don't use that word. At least, not that I know of. Now, if we could stop being morons, ... Okay. Now on to the Matthew 24:7 section. And we have a chart, and it's just amazing. Moped crime is soaring in London from Statista. In 2014, there were just over 1,000 smash and grab criminal events in London, where a thug on a scooter would drive up and grab what you were holding and rush away. Usually they grab your phone or purse. Now, the incidents are up to 17,604 for just the first 9 months of 2017. And those incidents now include murder and attempted abductions in addition to the smash and grabs. Almost 18,000 in 9 months? Wow! And the mayor of London is a Muslim who has told the police to investigate anyone critical of Islam. 20 years ago, London was a safe city. I was there. Now it's a city controlled by Islam, with a crime problem that is out of control. Do you think that there might be a connection? I don't know. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Okay. Then there's the Gog and Magog section, and I've been writing about the coming of Gog and Magog for a while. You can find a lot of that in my book that I wrote that is free, Ezekiel'sFire.com. And the articles in this section point to that coming. I really, really, really hope that you'll be ready for this. Please read Ezekiel's Fire to make sure that you are. And yes, it's free. And it's been a labor of love, and I hope that you really look into it. A lot of people have said that they've been blessed by it. Now, the Israel-Syria crisis. There are fears of new conflicts at one of Israel's quietest borders, Bloomberg.Quint, and it's talking about the Syrian border of Israel up at the Golan Heights. I'm debating about whether to create an Isaiah 17 section, since Iran's attempt to start a war with Israel from Syria will lead to the fulfillment of prophecy about the destruction of Damascus. And in this case, it will be a horrifying destruction in which Damascus will be unable to be lived in. It will be that bad. Here are a few key paragraphs from this article. Quote, any Syrian soldier who enters the buffer zone endangers his life. Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman said on Tuesday, we are not prepared to accept any Iranian presence in Syria. Israel has already carried out numerous strikes against Iranian targets in Syria and arms convoys bound for the Iranian-backed Lebanese Hezbollah, which is fighting alongside Assad's forces. Yet, after backing Assad for 7 years, Iran and its allies won't easily give up the military infrastructure they have built close to Israel, including militias, bases, and a drone operation, according to the Israelis. And then here's another quote. Iran, some analysts said, is playing a long game. It's sitting out the campaign in southern Syria, deeming it less risky to let Assad's troops win back territory near the Israeli-held section of the Golan, said Omar Lamrani, senior military analyst at Stratfor, a Texas-based advisory firm. This is the Iranians themselves accepting that for the sake of success of the offensive, it's better they sit it out, Lamrani said. Then, at a time of their choosing, they can try to penetrate the border area, said Ehud Yaari, a fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Then there's this next quote. "We were brainwashed for decades to hate Israel," said Hani, a resident of southern Syria being treated for shrapnel wounds at Israel's Galilee Medical Center in Nahariya. "I now see that my enemy isn't Israel, but the people who came and destroyed our village." He declined to give his full name for fear of reprisal. Shared enmity of Shiite Iran has allowed Israel to create quiet ties with Sunni-led Gulf states that once shunned it. By that same token, Israel's support for the Sunnis in Syria against the government and Iran-backed forces wasn't a failed investment, said Sami Nader, head of the Levant Institute for Strategic Studies in Beirut. "They don't hate Israel anymore or see it as a threat," Nader said. "Israel is not seen as the worst enemy." Close quote. This means war, and it will be horrifying. All because Shiite maniacs in Tehran have visions of power and domination. And please remember, they honestly believe that they need to set the world on fire to bring the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, back to rule the world for them. They believe that they must destroy Israel and America to make it happen. And they have plans to do this. And these people are completely serious. They are willing to burn their own country, and they have said this many times, to make this happen. Please do not underestimate these people. It's very important. Anyway, that's it for this week's ShockCast. I truly hope that you'll be ready for what is coming. A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Proverbs 22:3. If you find a flaw in my reasoning, have a question, or wish to add your own viewpoint, leave a comment on the Omega Shock website or in the comments section below. Omega Shock readers and ShockCast listeners leave awesome comments, and I value each and every one of them. Again, make sure that you are subscribed to the Shock Letter at theshockletter.com. In fact, everyone should sign up for the Shock Letter. It's free. Subscribing and unsubscribing is easy, and there's no way that I would ever share the subscription list with anyone, period. You have my promise on that. For those of you on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below and click the bell to get notifications. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. All of that helps you and me get the message out. And so, allow me to practice a little my Hebrew and close with this blessing from Numbers 6:24-26. Yevarecha Yehovah Yeshmerecha. Ya'er Yehovah panav elecha v'chuneka. Yesa Yehovah panav elecha v'yesa lecha shalom. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. Numbers 6:24-26. May your pastor give you the words that you need to continue walking the path that God calls you to follow. And Lord willing, I will see all of you next week.